So I want to continue on our program here, and now I'm happy to introduce our next presenter, Jessica Bunting. Uh, Jessica Bunting is a MPH, is the director of the Research to Practice program at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training. Jessica has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the George Washington University and a master of public health in community and behavioral health from the University of Maryland. She has 2 decades of experience working in the field of public health, with more than 13 years focused on construction, occupational safety, and health at CPWR. She and her team work to encourage widespread adoption of evidence-based solutions by construction contractors and workers through improving partnerships between researchers and stakeholders, increasing R2P capacity of intermediary organizations, helping stakeholders influence future research, and developing tools, strategies, and resources to translate and disseminate research findings. Jessica is going to talk to us today about head protection, opioids, and depression in the construction industry, some things that Director Ketchum just mentioned. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Jessica, please take it away.
Thanks, TJ. And I believe you should be seeing the correct view of my slides. I'm going to be talking again about protecting your head and what's inside of it today. So these are two kind of very hot issues at the moment, but they're also high priority for CPWR in both the research that we're doing and the education and outreach efforts. So I'm going to start by talking about why is selecting the right headgear important. And that is primarily for TBI protection. A traumatic brain injury, or a TBI, is an injury, any injury that affects how the brain works. So that can be caused any number of ways by a bump, blow, jolt, or penetration injury to the head. They can be mild, but they can also be more serious and lead to disability or death. Construction workers in all trades are at a high risk for TBIs. It's really hard to find a construction site where there is no struck by risk and no fall risk and things like that. So among all US industries, construction has the highest number of both non-fatal and fatal work-related TBIs. Again, most of those are coming from struck by related incidents where there's a falling object, a flying object, or the head is getting struck against some type of equipment. And then more than half of fatal work-related TBIs are caused by falls. So especially falls from heights, including roofs, ladders, and scaffolds. So the human toll of TBIs in construction is extremely high. If we look at a couple different time periods, and the reason for this is just the way data was collected, shifted over time. And so we just have two subsets of data. But if we look between 2003 and 2010, we can see that more than 2,200 construction workers died from a fall. And these deaths represented 25% of all construction fatalities and 24% of all work-related TBI fatalities among all industries during that period. And then similarly from 2015 to 2022, over, again, 2,297 construction workers died from fatal intracranial injuries, which is similar. They just recharacterized TBIs to intracranial injuries. So the important takeaway here is that wearing protective headgear, among other things, is essential for reducing the risk of a TBI. So how do we select the right protective headgear? CPWR, was hearing a lot of conversation and a lot of confusion around what's happening with headgear right now and the sort of the transition from traditional hard hats to safety helmets. And so we wanted to learn more about it, and we wanted to be able to advise others in the industry. So in 2023, we decided to convene an expert panel made up of representatives from academia and researchers, from the labor side of things, government, manufacturing, from contractors, employer representatives, and others. And so we had two main goals in establishing this panel. We were basing it on the Delphi method. And so we wanted to use this panel of experts as a way to learn more about kind of the state of events in the industry. What is happening with industry awareness and adoption of type 2 protective headgear, both with and without chin straps over time? What does that look like? And then we also, again, wanted to establish and disseminate recommendations for the use of protective headgear. And so, again, kind of loosely following the Delphi method, which is a systematic process to achieve consensus among a panel of experts, we set up this group. Initially, we were aiming for about 10 to 15 people on our panel, but we had a ton of interest. And so we ended up with 25 panel members. And we've been meeting periodically. We've had 5 meetings since between 2023 and October 2024. We also, as part of the process of reaching consensus and learning more about what's happening in the industry and also what should go into our resources, we distributed and analyzed 4 questionnaires. So essentially, there was an iterative process as we developed our resources to have conversations in the meeting, and then follow it up with a survey, and then follow it up again with more conversation until we were able to reach consensus. Ultimately, we produced, I think, a really good basic guide to selecting head protection for construction work as our first product. And this has actually been released now as a second version, because we released it, and as many of you may have heard, there's a current update happening to the ANSI Z89.1 head protection standard. And so after our initial release, we ended up working with some folks on the ANSI ISEA committee to make some updates, and we also got some additional feedback from our expert panel. So we re-released it, and we also put it out in Spanish. And it basically provides an overview of everything that somebody needs to know to make an educated decision about selecting the right head protection, including kind of what questions to discuss with the manufacturers. So the sections included are, it kind of goes over in the first half of the resource, defining terms like hard hats versus safety helmets, providing information about the difference between type 1 and type 2 head protection, explaining key elements of the current standard. We also get into some limitations, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, additional testing for headgear, and then primary factors to consider. So one thing we stress is that the use of hard hats versus safety helmets is really a stylistic differentiation, because that was the conversation that we kept hearing, right? Is a hard hat better? Is a safety helmet better? And then when we started to look into it, it turns out that's really just a stylistic determination. And it doesn't tell you anything about the level of protection or the performance of the headgear, so whether it's called a hard hat or a safety helmet. And so the important thing to know right now is that OSHA requires all protective headgear, whether it's a helmet style or a hard hat style, to be tested and designated as either type 1 or type 2, according to the ANSI ISEA Z89.1 standard. And so based on that fact, we've gone ahead and outlined in a chart what is the overall differences between type 1 and type 2. Type 1 protective headgear being intended to reduce the force of collision from a blow to the top of the head only, whereas type 2 is meant to protect against the force of collision from a blow to the top or the sides of the head. And we get into kind of exactly what that means. We have several diagrams in addition to the table that demonstrate how type 1 and type 2 headgear testing is performed. And then again, we do also get into some limitations of this. Some of these limitations are recognized in the standard itself. One major one here is the idea of doing a risk assessment, which I'm going to talk more about, and making sure that you follow the hierarchy of controls. so that PPE is never the end-all be-all of protection. We should be thinking about how we can reduce the risk for struck-by incidents and falls to begin with, before just relying on helmets. And then, of course, protective helmets can reduce the amount of force, but they cannot provide complete head protection from severe impact and penetration is another limitation. One that is not discussed, however, is that there's no third-party testing or certification required in the standard. And so what this means is there's a description of how the testing should be done, but then there's no actual oversight of that testing, and there's no third-party certification requirements like those found in other government regulations. And so because of this, we suggest talking to your manufacturer about their testing methods and results, finding out and making sure that they comply with the standard, and then also consider requesting a certificate of compliance or a declaration of conformity. And then we get into, again, job hazard analysis and really thinking about what hazards are going to be faced on the job. We have some tools for pre-job planning highlighted on this slide. If you go to CPWR.com, we have a bunch of planning tools, but recently we put out a sort of packet that specifically helps with the pre-task planning or the job hazard analysis step of risk assessment and control. In the document, we highlight a number of factors to consider when selecting head protection. And the first 5 relate specifically to worksite factors. And it's important to keep in mind here that we need to think about every phase of work. And so if we think about operating a crane, right, that presents a certain set of hazards. But if we think about the whole scope of things from assembly and maintenance and de-assembly as well, we may end up facing different hazards along the way. And so we want to make sure that our head protection accommodates all of the phases of construction and the hazards that may be encountered. And then there are other factors related to equipment needs, such as uses of accessories and electrical hazards. We get into more specific information about that, like hazard specific categories for headgear, class C, E, and G in the document. And then the last 2 factors we talk about relate more to individual preference. Cost is one, although from what I've been hearing from contractors that have made the switch from traditional hard hats to safety helmets, cost was essentially a non-factor in the sense that the safety payoff was well worth it in the end. And the other sort of personalized factor is comfort and fit. This is really important because if something doesn't fit correctly, not only is it not going to protect you as well, but you're also more likely to take it off during the day because it's not as comfortable, or it's slipping down and getting in your way and creating a new hazard that way. Some more details on all of these can be found in the document. But moving on to what's inside your brain, why should we focus on mental health? And Scott Ketchum talked a little bit about this in his presentation, but as it is a key issue for OSHA, it is a critical issue for CPWR to address, because when we look at the numbers and how people are dying in the industry, we're seeing that 17 times as many overdose deaths happened in 2022 as compared to fatal work-related injuries, and 5 times as many suicide deaths. And so those are really, really big numbers, and this is something that we need to figure out as an industry how to address. It is important to note that these numbers are not longitudinal. So we're looking at 2021 or 2022, and we're seeing all these numbers indicating a mental health crisis. I think some people are taking that to mean that this is a new issue, that substance use is a new issue to the industry, that suicide is a new issue to the industry, and that's not at all the case. But what we just don't have historical data to know kind of what the picture looks like. But a lot of the issues, industry-related risk factors that pertain to overdose deaths and suicide deaths and related mental health issues have been around for quite a long time. And so we do know in 2021, if we kind of look at these numbers a different way, the suicide death rate for workers in construction was 2.5 times higher than all industries. So construction and extraction are at the top when it comes to industries that have suicide risk. If we break it down a little bit further, oil and gas is the top occupation, and then construction hits right underneath of that. In particular, male suicide rates in construction were 50 per 100,000 workers compared to 30 per 100,000 workers for all industries. Similarly, when we look at overdose deaths, more than 1 in 6 people aged 16 to 64 years old who died by overdose were construction workers in 2022. And almost 90% of those overdoses were caused by some sort of opioid, either synthetic, natural, or a natural opioid or heroin. 3/4, so like 75%, were caused by synthetic opioids other than methadone. And that category includes, why am I blanking now on the name of the drug that is much cheaper than heroin and has now become a drug of choice, that before we were finding it in opioids accidentally. Fentanyl, sorry, I don't know why I was blanking on fentanyl. And now we know that people are seeking out fentanyl as a stronger and less expensive drug, and so that's contributing to a lot of suicide deaths. But Narcan does work on both heroin, regular opioids, and synthetic opioids like fentanyl. And so it is well worth considering having naloxone or Narcan on the job site. It can save a life. So I mentioned earlier industry-related factors. I'm not going to dig too deep into these. I think a lot of us are familiar with them, but we know that there's a lot of pressure with a low margin for error. Often the job can require traveling, so there can be isolation or separation from family and friends. There's a lack of paid leave, which makes it hard to utilize healthcare, makes it hard to treat injuries. So people experience chronic pain, which can lead to dependence on opioids. There is a male-dominated atmosphere with a tough guy mentality, and alcohol and drug use is sort of commonly accepted. A lot of the same factors exist for opioid use, but one thing I really want to draw your attention to here related to opioid use is the role that injury prevention or injury plays in opioid addiction, but also the role that injury prevention can play in preventing opioid use. And so we call this sort of the pain chain or the pain train, where construction work is hard, there are high rates of injury, people get prescribed opioids, they continue taking opioids so that they can work, because if they don't work, they don't get paid, and then that ultimately leads to addiction. We know from research that even a short-term prescription can lead to addiction on opioids. People who have been prescribed or taken opioids for 1 day have a 6% chance of still using the drug a year later. But then if we look at longer-term prescriptions, if somebody is taking it for a month, they have a 30% chance of still being on it a year later. And so we've created some resources to try to kind of have conversations with doctors and nip that in the bud, so people are looking at alternative pain management instead of getting on opioids to start with. Ignoring these issues is definitely not the answer. I'm hearing a lot less people say this in recent years, but we can no longer say that we don't have a mental health or suicide problem. So what can we do? And I just want to wrap up with some ideas of how you can change the culture in your workplace to help address these things, and how you can be a support system. So championing mental health in your workplace, we don't all have the power to necessarily change what's happening at the leadership level, but we can all kind of lead and destigmatize by example, by talking to one another about what we're going to, by seeking out or offering additional training and support, by building a community, finding ways to get to know each other better. And just generally letting people know that you're available, can talk, can be really crucial. There are a lot of mental health trainings available out there that you can seek out as a company or as an individual. VitalCog is one that actually pertains to construction, but all of these are really, really good suicide prevention trainings. Mental health first aid, Living Works, and QPR are all really great ones. We also have a bunch of free resources at CPWR, and I'm on the board of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which is CIASP. They have a bunch of good resources. We have toolbox talks, hazard alert cards, things like that, for just EV training that's accessible to employees at any level. And then just really briefly, if you do recognize that someone is in need or might be in need, a really easy method to intervene is the task method. We say tune in when you notice or sense that a person may need help, focus your attention on them, pay more attention, look for warning signs. Ask directly if they are okay. This is not going to put something in someone's mind. It's not going to make someone consider suicide if they're not already considering it, but it can end up saving their life. Let them know that suicide is serious and connecting to help is important, and then take that step of connecting them to life-saving aid. And that can be maybe local resources, maybe you have a resource on the job, or it can just be as simple as calling 988. Everyone is different. So you don't want to get too stuck on the warning signs. There are some common warning signs where people may say that they're feeling trapped in their life, they're feeling like a burden. They talk about estate planning. They may have been getting into accidents at work. They may be coming in late or calling out more often, getting into fights or having mood swings. But the key thing is just, if you know somebody, and try to get to know your coworkers and your crew members. And if you know somebody and you see that they start acting different, that can, in and of itself, can be a warning sign. We have a number of resources, again, which I already mentioned, at cpwr.com. Everything we put out is free. So we have training programs that go into more depth that have facilitator guides and PowerPoints. And then we also have supplemental resources. This QR code goes to our main mental health page, which then you can navigate into resources for suicide prevention, resources for opioids, etc. And then we just started a new newsletter devoted to suicide prevention and opioids. It has articles on things like naloxone and having naloxone in the workplace. As I mentioned earlier, we're setting up peer support programs, and you can subscribe to that. It comes out monthly. And then finally, I just wanted to wrap up with the CIASP website and resources, which again, they are all free, and there's a lot there that you can check out. I don't know if we have time for questions. I think I'm right up on my time, but TJ, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate it. That's some great information, and yeah, we are at the time, but I wanted to just check. I mean, very important subjects, both the things you were talking about. So just make sure, is there any burning question in the audience before we move on? And obviously if there's other questions, Jessica provided a lot of great resources there that we can, that we'll share. We'll be sharing again the recording of this. I'll share her slides with everybody that's participating so they can get access to those resources as well. But I really appreciate it, Jessica. That's great information. I appreciate for you and CPWR for what you guys are doing. Again, it's really important. Both the head protection and the mental health stuff is very important for this industry. So thank you very much.